Indiana Jones, It's a podcast about Indiana Jones. Every movie, 1 minute at a time. Indiana Jones Minute.
Welcome back to the Indiana Jones Minute. This is the podcast where we enjoy a milkshake with the film Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, 1 minute at a time. I'm Tom Taylor.
I'm Pete Mummert.
I'm Joe Christopher, St. Anthony the Abbot, patron saint of gravediggers. I thought that would be appropriate for this this movie.
Digging, sure.
Porter.
Yeah.
Yes. Porter.
Oh, Porter, yeah. Okay. And today we welcome back our old pal who refers to Lucas and Spielberg as George and Steven. He's the author of all the Making of Star Wars books and the Making of Indiana Jones, Lucasfilm insider and good guy, Jonathan Rinzler. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me back again. I don't know why.
I guess we like you. I don't know.
Something weird is going on, if you ask me.
It's a long con. You'll find out halfway through Crystal Skull. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, we're glad you're back with us to talk about. You asked for this minute specifically, actually, with Henry and Indy talking on the Zeppelin. We've got minute 75, which begins with Indy musing about the last time he had a drink with his dad. And it ends with Henry saying that Indy left just as he was becoming interesting. I
did. I love this little part.
It's a prime part of the whole movie. I don't blame you. But yeah, Indy starts this off by saying that the last time they had a drink together, he had a milkshake. And when do we think the last time Indiana Jones had a milkshake was? Because the implication is that he was like a kid when they last had a drink together, but maybe he was, 30. And he's like, I'll have a milkshake. It's hot out.
I would say 15.
Yeah. It might be.
I think that's what it's going for, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he says something in a minute that makes you think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it could be 8.
Yeah.
I mean, as you guys know, I scour the globe seeking out the best milkshakes and malts. And, I've even shared them with some of the listener crusaders, Sean German, Tierney, Daniel. And, here, he says, I'm trying to imagine Indy with the milkshake. And the first thing I thought is, okay, so what's his favorite flavor?
Oh.
Does he have a milkshake with mutt in Crystal Skull?
I'm thinking about that. I don't know. They're in that that diner kind of on campus fun joint. It seems like they would. I don't know. Like, doesn't Mutt try to steal a beer or something like that? Or
he does, yeah. But I don't remember what Indy's drinking.
If anything, I don't know.
And if they are, is that almost? I don't know. I have to see the movie again. But is that a sort of a throwback to this scene?
Oh, maybe.
I don't know.
I'd like to ask Jonathan, because you get the peek behind the curtain. What do you think? The Indiana Jones, all the Indiana Jones sagas. What do you think his favorite flavor is?
Oh dear, that's such a loaded question.
I know, that's why I asked it.
It's just on pure instinct. I'd have to say chocolate, just because he's in many ways he's a traditionalist, and so I have to go with chocolate.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a great answer.
Yeah.
I thought maybe date and honey. It's like, I mean, we know he likes dates, and honey, I don't know, it has kind of a biblical ring to it.
Yeah, it does. It was the Bible sweetener.
So I'm kind of wondering if after he seems like he had so much fun in Shanghai. I'm wondering if he would get like a durian shake with tapioca balls in it.
Oh,
oh, maybe.
Did they have that in 1915?
According to Pete, they did.
Yeah, they may have. Who knows? I could see a Dayton honey shake though, or malt from 1915.
Don't you drink Dayton honey shakes, Jerry?
I do. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna plug the 101 Cafe here in Los Angeles.
Oh, I was there a couple months ago.
Yeah, right in Hollywood. They have a nut and honey shake that is to die for, and I would put it on the map of one of the best. You know,
Nice.
scouring the globe, one of the best.
I'll have to try it.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Well, you got to think of like what they would have in Utah. Like in Utah in like 1912 or whatever.
Yeah.
When he was a kid, when he probably
Yeah.
had his last milkshake with his dad. Yeah, it'd probably be like chocolate, vanilla, strawberry. That's it.
Yeah, at that point, like strawberry is exotic.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Did they have chocolate Coke back then? Like, was that a thing
Oh, weird.
in 1912?
They must have, like phosphates.
Yeah, because when we were in Utah, Jer, I got a chocolate Coke, and it was one of the nicest things I've ever drunk.
Oh, wow.
Then yes.
Do you think that people recognize Indy now that he's not wearing the steward's uniform anymore? Like, do you think they realize that was the same guy that was asking for tickets?
We were sort of wondering this last minute. Like, yeah, like all of a sudden he just, all is forgiven. He takes off his white steward thing, and all the people who are terrified of him that they're going to chuck him out the blimp, or excuse me, the Zeppelin. And I'm like, oh, I guess he's talking to that elderly man over there, and everything's fine. Enjoying a beverage.
Speaking of talking to elderly men, if you look in the background when you see the profile shot of Indy and his dad, you can see Frederick Jaeger kind of regaling his table mate with his World War I flying ace stories. This was that forgotten or that deleted thread.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And then I think, I'm not positive, but I think if you look behind Indy, you can see the top of kind of a balding head with a newspaper up over the face like a spy, or kind of like Dennis Muir in Raiders. And I think that's Pat Roach, but I'm not
really?
positive. It looks like the same. I was kind of analyzing the receding hairline with Pat Roach running to catch the Zeppelin in that scene, and I think it might be him sitting back there.
Interesting.
Oh, I see who you're talking about. Under the lamp near the beautiful floral display.
Right.
That's so frustrating because we love Pat Roach. We've loved him in 2 movies so far, and we see that he's in the movie, and then he's not in the movie. Like, apparently he had some big thing. I mean, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but, I mean, Jonathan, you're here with us. You wrote the book on this movie. Like, do you know why that scene was cut out?
I proposed doing a book for each film at the time, but the publisher said, no, we want to combine all 4 movies into one book, which I still think was a mistake. As a result, though, I didn't have time, and I couldn't do the kind of research I would have liked to have done. So I don't have the answers to a lot of questions. Which scene are you talking about?
I'm assuming there was a big fight scene between Indiana Jones and Pat Roach.
No, there's not a fight scene.
Oh, it's not?
No. So he will, and I'll save the ending of this scene until we get to that minute, a couple minutes from now. But Pat Roach is a Gestapo officer, kind of keeping tabs on what's going on, and he and the World War I flying ace are going to confront them in a couple minutes.
Oh, weird.
Wow.
Well, now I don't feel as bad. I assumed that there was going to be a fight between Pat Roach and Harrison Ford.
No, he
and
goes
that's what
out
we're missing. But I guess
in
we're
a very
okay.
sort of disappointing manner.
Forget it.
You guys don't want to give away what happens in a few minutes because we're going to talk about that.
We can actually give it away. Yeah, we've been teasing it so long. We probably should now that we've got you here. So Indy, when they get into the biplane underneath the Zeppelin and they take off, everybody, like the crew, realizes that that's Henry and Indy, and they like the World War I flying ace Frederick Jaeger is so upset he like immediately runs after them, and Pat Roach is with him, and they jump into, there's a second biplane behind Indy and Henry's, and they jump into that, and they're just about to pursue them, but I think Frederick Jaeger is drunk. And so he releases the biplane from the bottom of the Zeppelin, but forgets to turn it on, and it just plummets to the earth and crashes.
Right. I do remember that.
Oh my God.
That's too bad they cut that. It's hilarious.
Yeah, I love that. And I wish there were more Pat Roach in this.
Yeah, me too. That's the real crime. Yeah.
And there are a couple scenes. He looks pretty sharp. He's just wearing a black suit and a black tie and some black leather gloves.
Man.
Well, I feel like diving into the meat of this minute and with our guest here, I'm dying to know, Jonathan, why did you request this minute specifically?
Well, it's the first half of this talk between father and son, which is the kind of scene that you don't get a lot of in blockbuster movies. It's very snappy dialogue. It's, Jeffrey Boehm, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, did a great job in, their characters come out in very brief dialogue. And I've always loved when, Indiana Jones is sort of complaining about his upbringing and his father doesn't let him get away with it and says, I was a great father. And then then one of the best lines, I think, in cinema for me is, you left just when you were getting interesting. I mean, that is a great line.
It's super interesting too, because it's like, it's sort of like, he says it like, knock it off, quit complaining. And like, he's kind of like swatting him away with that line. But it also, if you think about it, you're like, there's like a little bit of hurt in there too, I think. Like, oh, my son just ditched me. My son left like 20 years ago. And, I'm going to act cool and not hurt about it because I'm actually not cool and hurt. Yeah.
And he seems genuinely seems like he feels like he's a fantastic father.
Right.
Like, it doesn't seem like he seems really surprised that Indy's upset.
Yeah. Like, neglect is something to be cherished in a father. I had the main excellent quality that everybody looks for in a parent. I just did not give Wilhelm about you.
What I found today, and which I loved at the time, was when they announced that Sean Connery was going to play Indy's dad. I'm sure you guys have already talked about it, but it was such a great casting idea that Spielberg had. And I forget, Sean Connery is only something like 5 years older than Harrison Ford.
It's not much. It's like 8 or 10. He's barely older
12.
than Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
Okay,
Still,
12.
Oh, is he 12?
I think so.
But in terms of the reality of it and the fiction of it, it works so well because Connery became this huge star in 1962, and James Bond is sort of a conservative character. He disses the Beatles, and he represents kind of the tail end of British World War II imperialism. So in our mind, he has that kind of Hollywood star power, which predates Harrison Ford, who doesn't get to be a star till the late 70s. So it's like post 60s, long hair and all that. So he really does seem like a different generation. And he's American. And, they set it up so well, and it could so easily have been a disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, George Lucas was not sure it was going to work out at all. He resisted casting Sean Connery for, behind the scenes reasons, because Connery was, known to be kind of difficult to work with. Not that he was a prima donna or anything, but he was like, he had his own ideas about how things should be done. And, but the script, the screenwriter wrote great dialogue for them, and the two of them are, and I think it raised Harrison Ford's game quite a bit. And it's just you're seeing two stars still at the peak of their powers, and with great material. So that's why I asked for this scene. It's so fantastic. And I want to know if you guys know why there's a red and white, what looks like rose on the table between them. What is going on there?
Oh my God, I brought that up. I'm so touched. No. Why?
It's interesting because, red, carnations have played a big part in these because he was wearing one when he was kind of playing James Bond when he shows up in Club Obi-Wan with Lao She. He's wearing a red one. And then Panama Hat's wearing a red one at the beginning of this movie. And then here on the table, we've got pink and white ones.
Yeah.
It's not there by accident. I'm sure Spielberg thought about it before he shouted action.
Yeah.
I mean, the red and the white kind of look a little like the Nazi flag, but then you got some pink in there, some softening, some human emotion. I don't know. I'm grasping at straws.
Well, the white goes with everything, but the red, maybe he just wanted to get some color in there. I don't know.
Maybe.
Well, it's also interesting because the flowers are right between Indy and Henry, and they're sort of this soft feminine thing. It's almost like they're, Indy's mom is there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I like that.
I love how stubborn Henry is here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Because he says, "Do I detect a rebuke?" And it's perfect. It's perfect academician, like defensive.
Uh-huh.
You're like, this is, and I'm wondering, is, he says, as Jonathan pointed out, he says, "No, I was a great dad. I'm a great father." And I'm wondering, does he really believe that, or is he just a counterpuncher?
I think he does sort of believe that. I think
so
he's
too.
like, what kid wouldn't want to not have any rules and, not have your dad bugging him and stuff? It's weird.
I suspect that Henry grew up with very strict, Victorian parents that didn't let him do anything. And they very strictly regulated his life. And he probably thought, you know what, I'm going to do the exact opposite. I'm going to let him have all the freedom he wants so he can grow into his own person.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting, too, because we've been debating, from Indy's first reaction to him when he busts through the window and gets hit over the head with a vase, and he kind of stands up with a, "Yes, sir," and it's like, and, he gets slapped for blaspheming and stuff. We've been wondering, was Henry a real, hands-on, borderline abusive dad, taskmaster kind of guy? But he's making it sound like, no, like the abuse was that he just didn't care, and that he just wasn't involved at all, and he was just completely absent.
But it might not even be that he didn't care. Like, this might have been an active choice. Like, I want to let him develop on his own. It seems like that's how he's approaching it anyway.
Yeah.
Like, it may have wound up being, for all intents and purposes, neglect. But it seems like in his mind, he was actually doing something nice for his son.
Well, so did Henry teach Indy self-reliance, or did Indy just not have a choice? I think there's a big difference.
I don't know. I mean, there's a degree of that in good parenting. You don't do everything for your kid and you let them make mistakes and stuff, and they learn from that. But yeah, there's a difference between that and just being like, no, I don't want to hear that the sheriff is here. I don't want to hear that you just found the Cross of Coronado. I'm trying to, trace my little pictures in my diary. You count to 20 in Greek.
What's the old adage? Give a man a self-reliance, he'll have self-reliance for a day. Teach a man self-reliance, he'll have it for a lifetime.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I think it had something to do with fishmongers.
Well, Indy says it was a lonely way to grow up. And he says, if you had only been an ordinary average father like the other guy's dads, you'd have understood that. Mm-hmm. And does Indy really wish that his dad were average, or is he just complaining? Because it seems like if his dad were, just an average Joe and he drove a bus or were a carpenter or an accountant or something, Indy wouldn't have turned into this guy that he is. He wouldn't have had this lifestyle.
I think that's one of those, the grass is greener.
Uh-huh.
Like, Porkins, Herman,
Yeah.
he probably saw Indy's dad, was like, "Oh my God, you got the best dad. He doesn't ask you anything, and you can go to sleep at 4 a.m. and you don't have to wash your ears."
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to eat up. Well, in this case, but
You have to
anyway,
the spit guard on your bugle.
exactly. So, but of course, that's what, grass is greening. That's, Indy probably wanted a little bit more attention and focus and whatever the opposite of neglect is.
Yeah. Love. It's called love, dear.
Love. Yeah, it's called love. I can't speak in those terms.
Loving attention.
The opposite of neglect.
Yeah.
Well, I wondered, so if it was a lonely way for Indy to grow up, is Indy lonely now? Or is he just is he just accustomed to this?
No, I feel like Indy's 100% lonely. Like, I think that's why
I kind of think so too.
latches on to Willie and Short Round and Marion. Like, I feel like he doesn't have a lot of people in his life. And even the ones that are there, it seems like he has a hard time dealing with on a human level. Like, it seems like he learned self-reliance so well from his dad that he kind of treats other people the same way that his dad treated him.
It's almost like his defining characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Self-reliance, and we always talk about how Indiana Jones just makes it up as he goes. That's because of self-reliance.
Well, what you guys are touching on, I think, is true. That's why can I talk about the end of the movie or not?
Yeah,
sure.
of course.
Oh, of course.
I mean, that's why the last shot of the Last Crusade is so wonderful, with them all riding off together. It's as if there's a small nuclear family has sort of reformed. He's with his dad.
Yeah.
It was such a great way to end the Indy series. But then they made another one.
Why not? Don't say goodbye.
What the hell?
But yeah, you're right. It's his dad and probably his two closest friends in the world, Marcus and Sala. Even though it's kind of like they don't, I don't know, we were saying in Raiders when he says goodbye to Sala, it seems very kind of stiff and yeah, you're my friend. Or something. Sala's all open-hearted and Indy, I'm gonna miss you. I'm already missing you. Give him this huge hug, and he's kind of yep, you're my pal. Yeah, thank you. He's kind of dry about it. He can't get close to people or something. He doesn't. We've said this a lot about all the women in his life. Every love scene except for him and Marion. I mean, it's got its own issues, but he seems very uncertain and kind of making it up as he goes, and he just doesn't. Yeah, I don't think people are his thing necessarily. So yeah, he's lucky to have his dad and Marcus and Sala with him at the end.
And I feel like Spielberg has been making a remarkable transformation in how he tells stories, because we do the Anything Goes on the weekend, and in Close Encounters, the absent dad became so absent that he flew off with aliens into space. And then by E.T., there's no dad there, but kind of this surrogate dad, and Keyes shows up and ends up showing some kindness, and you see a slightly more. It's like Spielberg is coming to terms a little more with an absent father, and maybe this can turn out well. And then here you've got kind of the completion of that, where he started off with the absent father, and by the end, like you said, Jonathan, it's got this beautiful ending where the family is whole again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and I think. That was mirroring Spielberg's real life relationship with his father. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
that was the case.
Yeah,
because he was out of the picture for a long time, wasn't he?
Right.
Do you know if he ever did he eventually make up with his father and kind of?
I think so. Yeah,
had it coming together.
I mean, that's what I've heard. I mean, I don't know what the reality is, but I think that's what he said.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
There was that Spielberg documentary on HBO recently.
Oh, right.
A few months ago. And yeah, he did, by now, at least, his dad is back in his life and stuff. But there was a long time where, the dad left, I think when he was maybe in his late teens or something.
Uh-huh.
And then, I think there were a lot of years where he was just mad at his dad. Mm-hmm. And they didn't talk or something.
I mean, and that makes this film especially poignant, because it's almost like he's working out all of his issues, and he's sort of creating a scenario where everything comes out to be a happy ending here, in his life. And I think it's pretty amazing storytelling and a transformation.
Yeah.
So would you guys describe this scene as sad, in that Indy is trying to have a serious conversation with his dad, and his dad can barely look up from his Grail diary? Or is it hopeful in the sense that actually Indy is reaching out and he's like, okay, look here.
I feel like this is one of the happiest scenes in an Indiana Jones movie, because I feel like it starts off with Indy. It starts off kind of sad, and Indy's sort of like, Dad, I was lonely. And by the end of this scene, Henry actually laughs and welcomes, Indy into the quest with open arms. And it's no longer, I'm doing this search for the Grail. It's like, hey, let's have a look at this, what we need to do. We have work to do.
I don't know if I totally see it that way. I mean, I do agree that I think the scene is hopeful just because Indiana Jones gets to sit down with his dad and say probably the things that he's been either too angry or too distant to say for 20 years. But I don't think that Henry's bringing him in with the diary. I don't think that seems to have zero to do with their relationship. I think it's hey, instead of talking about actual stuff, let's get back to this diary and our Grail hunt.
Well, see, I felt it was more like he's taking him back. He's taking him on as an equal now. He's like, hey, we're
There's a degree of that, yeah.
I can see both of those, but I agree with Tommy on this one.
Yeah, I figured.
I think, but what I love about this is it's completely believable.
That's what I like about it too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be tied up or happy or anything. It's
Yeah,
solid.
and there's Henry Jones. He's Indy's dad, with all his flaws exposed, and he doesn't see him, and he's not gonna see him. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I was a great father, and and you're like, yeah.
Well, it's a blockbuster movie, right? They're following. It's a third one. There's a lot of pressure on them to make something that's as good or better than what came before. And I think it's interesting about this scene is if you can, lots of blockbuster movies have to have this kind of scene, right? They can't have constant action. There has to be some kind of character development. And usually it's so embarrassingly horrible. Where you just want to, you just want to press the fast forward or go, please God, kill me now. Or what were the screenwriters thinking? There are any number of, because it's hard to do and you need to have a breather, right? You can't just have constant action. But what's so wonderful about this movie is that they were able to get this relationship which works in terms of the plot in not a stupid kind of predictable way. It really works emotionally. And in the end, of course, it's central to the climax of the movie and not in a manipulative way. I remember when I saw it, I was really surprised. And I just think it's just the best kind of filmmaking, which is why for me the third picture is I love the first one and the second one too, but I love the third one the most because it just works so well at that level.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, that is a fantastic point because I've been sitting here. It's no surprise that I love the grittiness in Raiders, and I'm always longing for that. And Last Crusade is kind of, it's a little family fun-oriented, like we say, a little bit of a, McDonald's Playland romp, without the staphylococcus in the baubles, in the Playland baubles.
Yeah.
I could use a little of that. But here, which is so great, because you're right, the scene isn't like, he's like, oh, I'm sorry, boy, give me a big hug.
Right.
I'm proud of you. Like some awful, treacly horse crap. It's like, no, it oddly falls flat. He's like, it was a lonely way to grow up, and he's like, what are you talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's actually, and I'm the guy calling out the movie being a little too much like, goofy butterflies and sunshine, and I'm like, no, this is perfect. This is not goofy butterflies and sunshine at all. It, like, Indy reaches out and he doesn't fail, but it's not the response or the reaction he would want, and it's certainly not what you would expect, as you said, in a blockbuster movie.
Yeah.
And it also does leave room, like what you said, Pete, it also does leave room to move forward in some positivity, but something that's, like, realistic.
Yeah. This is the beginning of a conversation.
The fact is, they're both interested in the same thing. Archaeology and finding the Grail and that sort of thing. They're actually very similar.
Yeah. And Elsa.
And you see that, like, Henry is a flawed character, and you see why Indy, is a flawed character too. You're like, yeah, that's got to be really weird growing up with Henry as your dad. That explains a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also great because in the first two movies, Indy is, he's the heroic character. He's the top guy, and suddenly here, because he's facing James Bond, basically, he's kind of taken down a couple notches.
Yeah.
I love that.
Particularly when you think back to the original conversation between Spielberg and Lucas, where they're on the beach after Star Wars comes out, and Spielberg saying, I'd really love to make a James Bond movie. And Lucas said, I've got something better than Bond.
Yeah.
And he said, what's that? Well, it's Indiana Smith, I think, at the time. Or Nevada.
Yeah.
Nevada. I think it was Nevada Smith. Or I forget what it was, but it's in the book. It's funny because they made me change that. They made me change it so, because Lucas said, I got something better than Bond. And they made me change it because I didn't want to upset the James Bond fans or something.
So wait, what'd you have to change it to?
I can't remember. Whatever's in there.
Something else really good.
Or no, maybe it was I think I had a subhead that said better than Bond, and they made me change
Oh,
okay.
that's funny.
that.
Yeah. But you know what's great? If you told me like who's gonna take Indiana Jones down a peg, I'd be like, oh, get out of here, nobody. And then if you say, oh no, how about a Sean Connery is like, and I go, hey, you're right. I could see that.
Yeah.
That could work, and then it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and throughout the picture, I mean, yes, they're fighting Nazis. He even comes face to face with Hitler, but it's so well written that in almost all the action sequences too, it's about his relationship with his father. Even when he I forget which part it is. When he does something and the father gives him Sean Connery gives him this stern look.
Yeah.
It's like, I just saved our asses, but I'm still, the fact that my father still disapproves of what I just did is really annoying and gets me down,
Yeah. That feeling is really palpable in Indy, this whole movie. Because, like he slaps him for blaspheming, and he's like, oh, for crying out loud. I'm 30-something years old, and my dad's still slapping me. This is, what do I got to do?
Right.
It's an interesting point, actually. He says we haven't spoken in 20 years, which means that he slammed the door and left like just a couple of years after, the River Phoenix scene in 1912.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Like, he didn't stick around too long. He was like 13 in that scene.
Right. After that guy gives him the hat. I'm out of here.
The hat had a little propeller and it just carried him away. Bye, Dad.
Exactly.
Well, if you talk about Indy leaving and we said, all right, so it's a couple years after then, what's interesting is why was he interesting at that moment? Like, why was he interesting to Henry at that moment? Is it because he left?
I kind of think so, maybe.
Or
I don't. My interpretation is that it's because he was starting to, reason more like a grown-up and starting to become more educated. I mean,
yeah.
You're not allowed to sort of say that thing as a parent. Usually, that's another reason why it's so great. Is that right. I mean, I know a person who's remained nameless who kept comparing his kids to dogs and said, "Yeah, my kid's now smarter than my dog." And so some people are just not as interested in children until they can kind of relate to them intellectually. That's my interpretation.
Yeah. Well, I think until you can read an illuminated manuscript, I think
right,
then
exactly.
until you can all of a sudden you're interesting.
Until you can speak 5 dead languages, you're nothing to me.
What good are you?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, you mentioned, if I heard you right, that the third installment here is your favorite of the Indiana Jones movies. Is that right?
Yes, I think it's just my subjective opinion. Yes. I couldn't say objectively it's the best, but because they're all great in their own ways. But I think because of the father-son thing, and just because it works, it's like Spielberg says it when you get the end, when the plot comes together that well. He said he felt like, I know this movie is working. This story is working. It's just great for a storyteller to have that happen.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
Because even in the first one, which is a great, great, great film, the climax, I've often thought about this, and there's a difference between Westerns, and maybe, did we talk about this before, and James Bond movies, and that in James Bond movies, the James Bond almost never kills the villain. It's always something that happens as a result of everything at the end that the villain dies.
Oh, interesting.
And in Westerns, the hero generally shoots the villain.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And Indiana Jones is based more on the James Bond tradition, where if you think about the first movie, Indy doesn't kill any of the bad guys. It's the Ark of the Covenant that kills everybody.
Uh-huh.
But he's very passive in that moment. So I think just personally, the movie suffers a little bit, even though it's incredibly cool. Character-wise, it's not as strong as the third one, where he's active, but still doesn't actually kill anybody.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
He tries and fails to save somebody.
Yeah, actually. And in even Temple of Doom, he doesn't kill the bad guys. It's the stones, ultimately, that
that's right.
burn him up, and he falls. Whereas if you think of, Clint Eastwood movie, Clint Eastwood pretty much shoots the bad guy every time, and because it's in the tradition of the Western.
That's interesting.
There's an article to be written there.
Definitely. It's like Belloc was right. He said they're just passing through history. Like, and he's just sort of along for the ride watching stuff happen.
And it's funny because Spielberg took so much from John Ford. Like, it's interesting that he, in these movies, he went more to the James Bond side.
Yeah, I wonder how conscious that was.
Yeah, that'd be fun to ask him.
Yeah.
God, I never put that together. That's incredible. It's like there's something that transcends this Indiana Jones guy. It's bigger than him in all of these adventures,
Yeah.
Right, because I think the idea is that, like you said, passing through history is this idea that the situation is bigger than the people involved. And Dr. No, Dr. No sinks into the pool of acid or whatever it is because his hand is metal. Goldfinger gets sucked out of a plane.
Right.
And From Russia with Love, he kills him. So my theory doesn't hold
that's true.
each time. And but in Thunderball, it's the woman who kills the bad guy. Mm-hmm. And often, because the situation is, I think it's one of those, where the situation is bigger than the people involved. So the person is, it may be operating at a higher level. It's not just about vengeance; it's about saving the world, and therefore they don't actually kill their enemies. I don't know. I haven't thought beyond this. I probably should before I start talking. But
well, in the case of Indy, it seems like his method of surviving the movie and at the same time the method of the bad guys getting destroyed is that Indy sort of gets the truth of the situation before the bad guys do or something. Like, he knows not to look at the Ark. He knows not to actually mess with it. I start speaking some Indian tongue at the end of Temple of Doom, and that turns the stones against Balaram or something.
I think that is key. I think that's key because in each time he sort of achieves wisdom. He knows that they shouldn't be stealing these stones, and therefore he knows the words. And in Last Crusade, he knows that you're not supposed to get the Holy Grail. It's not what it's all about. And so each time he's achieved a kind of higher wisdom, and therefore doesn't get killed.
And it's interesting that at the end of this one, I don't think he would have made that unless his dad had been there to help him through.
Oh,
right,
that's true.
Right. That's again why it works so wonderfully.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, so that begs the question that I want to ask you, Jonathan. We've talked about it quite a bit on the show, but Indy witnesses these deities coming in and killing the bad guys or these Deus Ex Machinas like all the time, and so is Indy religious or is he agnostic, or does he just kind of throw all the deities into one big God thing at the end and put them together?
I think my gut reaction and quickly looking back over the films in my mind's eye is to say that in each film he sort of starts out as a kind of heretic, and by the end is more of a respectful believer. You know, in the first one, he's stealing this idol. The natives are still there apparently, so he's basically stealing their sacred idol. And by the end, though, he's keeping his eyes shut when they open the Ark of the Covenant. You could say that maybe he learned something. And in the beginning of Temple of Doom, he says fortune and glory. And by the end, it's more about saving the children and respecting, putting the stones back, not stealing them. Mm-hmm. And in this one, you know, he's blaspheming and getting smacked around. And by the end, he's listening to his dad and realizing the Holy Grail is something that is more spiritual than a little cup. So I think in each of them, they kind of reset the clock each time because the hero has to evolve. But overall, I'd say that Spielberg and Lucas are saying that, yes, this is a person who believes in God and believes in spiritual matters. And, you know, Lucas, I think, I always forget if he was brought up Calvinist or Methodist, but I think Lucas had a religious upbringing to some extent. And I know Spielberg started studying the Kabbalah. This might have been after this film. I don't know when he started doing that. But clearly these guys are interested in spiritual matters as well as, you know, just making movies. And I know that for a fact, I mean, it's obvious, Lucas has said it many times, that Star Wars, you know, he saw films as a vehicle for teaching. And that's why after this movie, he went off and did, you know, whatever it was, 25 or 30 episodes of Young Indy, which was all about teaching kids about history, really. You know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Some of those episodes are pretty good. Are you going to go through the Young Indy 1 minute at a time after this?
I don't think so.
What? Oh,
we might pick one or two. We'll see. No promises.
Yeah. So that's my long-winded response.
That makes sense.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of long-winded and growing up lonely, oh, come on, it's my sister. This just in from Professor Christy Porter. Indy has no problem staring down boulders and fiery beating hearts, Lao Che and Bridal Willie in a cage. Gruesome things. But Indy changes his rebuke to a, quote, regret, because his dad still wounds him.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Do you think he did? Did he change his... I think he meant it as a rebuke, and he softened it to a regret.
Yeah, I think so.
What does she mean exactly?
I think that's what she means. Like, he changed... He did mean... he was rebuking his father.
Yeah.
But he changed it to a regret because he was softening it, and I think he's still very much intimidated. Like, maybe it's the only thing other than snakes that actually gets to Indy is his dad.
Yeah,
like he kind of gets a little, you know, knock-kneed.
Yeah,
yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, he's quivering a bit. We don't see it because he's Indiana Jones, but
right.
I think it was a rebuke.
Yeah, I think it was too.
Well, there we are. No, yeah, I agree. I think. Yeah, I'm thinking. I think that both. I think a rebuke and a regret can both come from the same place.
Yeah, I do
you know,
too.
he was angry, and then that anger is based on, well, damn it, I haven't talked to my dad in 20 years.
Yeah.
This relationship sucks, and I wish I could do something about it.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say before you guys call it a day, I just love the simple way that this is staged, with them on a little balcony above the crowd, and you know you're always reminded by the sound and everything that they're on this Zeppelin. You have the windows there. It's beautifully done.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
And,
simple.
They're elevated, but so separated visually. It's very simple but elegant.
And like Jerry said a couple minutes ago, it's almost like a little one-act play.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's this really sort of cool little standalone scene.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us for this minute.
It's always a pleasure.
It's always good to have you back. Yeah.
It's always fun nerding out talking about Indiana Jones. Like I say each time, I don't get to do it that often. So
yeah, we'll try to give
we
you
do it all the
an outlet
time
as much as we can. Yeah. But before we say goodbye, is there anything you want to tell people about that you're working on?
Well, as I mentioned, I mentioned in an email. I'm just wrapping up a book about the 1968 Planet of the Apes.
Awesome.
It's a making of, like the other ones.
Uh-huh.
And it's coming out this fall. And just looked at the last pass of the layouts, and it's looking pretty good. So
awesome.
Hopefully people will like it.
Oh, it's exciting. I can't wait for that. That'll be awesome.
Yeah. And I just want to plug again, I'm not all the way through it, but I'm a big fan of your novel, All Up.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for
right.
plugging that. There's actually I've made a deal with a small production company that want to pitch it, as apparently these days, if you want to pitch to Netflix or Amazon, you have to make a comic book first and then take it to Netflix and Amazon. And I said, well, can't you just do storyboards and concept art? And apparently they like comic books better now. So, so we'll see. That's
words and pictures.
Yeah. And I know that way it gets, even more like a story, or it gets the, if a comic book company is willing to take a risk for this, then so will we. But I'm not.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, but that's happening for All Up. So maybe the next time we spoke, I'll have news. As we speak, I'll have news about that. Assuming that you guys ever invite me back.
Yeah, I think we've got you scheduled for later in the movie.
Oh, right. Really? Okay, I forgot.
Yeah.
Well, good then.
All right. Well, everybody, please come back tomorrow. Because, actually don't come back tomorrow because we won't be here. Come back next week. Come back on Monday, where we'll be discussing minute 76 of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade here on the Indiana Jones Minute.
My hands are folded. My ears are clean. Jones. I'm on my best behavior, Jones.